My colleague Ronnie Collins, who unfortunately isn't here today. I'm a little bit nervous with all these technical things that the whole thing is going to blow up, but hopefully not.
It's not even wanting to go
it isn't
full
even,
screen.
Yeah.
What is wrong with
Sure.
this computer?
We'll just go on.
Yeah.
So today's presentation isn't about the importance of including people with intellectual disabilities in research, because I feel that case has already been conclusively established, and we all know about the importance of giving people opportunities to be active citizens, to have voice, to exercise their autonomy, and so on. And we know that research that includes people, that reaches out or embraces people with intellectual disability will give us better research, better data, a wider variety of perspectives. So that's not what I'm here for today, because you already know that. What I'm here for today is to say that it's recently got a lot harder to do. It was already a bit of a minefield in terms of legal, ethical, and methodological problems, but those challenges have increased in recent times. So, we've got the full screen. So I'm going to frame my presentation this morning around a project that I'm working on, and it's the Moving In study. So I think it makes it a little bit easier if we use a practical example to kind of see what the difficulties are. And I'm going to look in particular at the impact of the Health Research Regulations 2018, which is a statutory instrument that came in and that flowed from the Data Protection Act. And I'm going to look and talk about, and really, I suppose, put it out to you in terms of what the future implications might be for research with people with intellectual disability. So the Moving In study, it's a national study, a multi-site study, which is something that we'll come back to later because it's one of the issues that presents a challenge. And it sort of came out of major transformative changes that were taking place in the disability sector, in the sector of disability services. So it followed on from changes that came from the Transforming Lives program and the desire to essentially look at these shifts that were happening in the service provision and see if we could establish whether or not that they were achieving benefits for people in terms of improved outcomes for them, and also how much they were costing, because there was very little data available about both of those. So our target population were adults receiving disability services. We didn't, unfortunately, or weren't able to do what Etna referred to earlier. We weren't able to do a random sample, so our sampling strategy was purposive. And we did have to negotiate with many gatekeepers that Eleanor referred to, so it was quite, and it continues to be quite a slow, sort of ponderous process in terms of recruiting the participants. We wanted to get as broad a spectrum of participants as possible. We wanted to get adults with all kinds of disabilities and with all levels of disabilities. But the bulk of our participants are adults with intellectual disabilities. And when you think about it, that makes sense because the bulk of the services within the disability sector are provided to adults with intellectual disabilities. So our target sample size is 600, and about a quarter of that is comprised of people who are living in priority sites for decongregation. So these were adults. All of the priority sites were homes to people with intellectual disabilities. They also quite often had physical and sensory disabilities as well. So these were adults that were living in congregated sites that were expected to transition to the community reasonably quickly. And we wanted to include them at 2 points in our study, so once before they moved and once after they moved. But the profile of these adults, the participants that within our study, really this particular group, this particular strand within our study is really a very, very vulnerable group with very high support needs. And it sort of it sort of replicates the findings, if you like, of the Value for Money report, which again pointed out that this was the residents within the congregated settings, very high levels of support needs, high levels of intellectual disability. So we adopted a mixed method approach. We are using a quality of life tool, a tool to assess the support needs, and we are using the observation of interviewers. So a mixture of quantitative and qualitative methods. So as all of you who are involved in research will know, informed consent is a fundamental underpinning of research. It's one of the fundamental principles. So this is sort of taken for granted that participation is dependent upon consent that is voluntarily given and that is fully informed. So to do that with people with intellectual disabilities presents challenges. So we set about commissioning easy read documentation for the project. So we have easy read information sheets, easy read consent forms. But despite our efforts, essentially this material continues to be not accessible to people with severe and profound intellectual disability. So essentially those participants who had that level of intellectual disability were not able to give us informed consent, were not able to give consent directly. And so we sought proxy consent from family members or support staff. So if you like, resorting to using a proxy consent is a compromise. It's a compromise that we had to make. We had to decide, do we rely on proxy consent or do we not include these people within our study? Now, when you think that these are the most vulnerable group of participants within our study, it didn't make a lot of sense to us to exclude them. So we opted for the decision to go with proxy consent. Now, again, in terms of the proxy consenter, the ideal is probably a close family relative. But again, if I bring you back to those people that were in, for example, the congregated settings, some of them for half a century, with very limited familial contact at this point, parents deceased, and often little or no family contact. And I'm not blaming anybody here because these people were moved from all over the country to these large institutional settings. But the reality is that the social networks of people with, particularly people with intellectual disability who are living in residential settings, that they don't replicate those of people within the general population. And they're very limited, and so the people who often know them best are in fact their support workers. So we, again, if you like, made a compromise and decided that it was appropriate to accept proxy consent from support workers. Because it was a multi-site research project, we had to apply and secure multiple ethical approval from lots of different research ethics committees. And again, it's the amount of work that goes into submitting these applications and securing the ethical approval just cannot be underestimated. Having said that, we did get a great deal of comfort from the fact that our approach was endorsed by those ethical approval committees. So although our proxy consenters, if you like, was this compromise that we had reached, and we knew that they did not necessarily have the legal authority to provide us with the consent, we were assured, if you like, of our ethical position on this in the approach that we had adopted. So in in going to all of these committees, I suppose we found it quite a difficult and frustrating process. We'd go to Committee A and they said, you know, we love your documentation, but we'd like you to change the wording on point 5, page 2. And then we'd go to Committee B and they wanted us to change the wording on point 4, page 3, and so on and so on. And some of the things, some of the issues absolutely valid and probably helped us and guided us in the approach that we adopted. But some of the issues that were raised were, you know, more idiosyncratic sort of points of emphasis that people wanted to bring out rather than fundamental to the actual research. So we were carrying on with our research and everything was kind of going along reasonably smoothly, and then we had the data protection legislation which came out in last year. And that was fine. You know, we sort of probably thought that it was relatively peripheral to us, and we probably thought that we pretty much had it sewn up in terms of all of our procedures around it. But we were wrong, because it was followed fairly quickly by the health research regulations, which kind of went off a bit like a bomb in the health research arena. And I suppose certainly we didn't see it coming anyway. So in case some of you aren't familiar with it, I'll kind of go through it in a little bit more detail. So first of all, it flowed from the Data Protection Act. It flowed specifically from Section 36 of the Data Protection Act. And it's the application of GDPR to personal data for health research. And within the regulations, the data protection regulations, health data is a special category or sensitive data, and it's very strictly regulated. Now, the regulations that came in under the statutory instrument, the health research regulations, they were optional safeguards that the Irish government brought in. So they're not standard throughout all research. But the definition of health research that's set out there encompasses public health and social care research. So disability services is social care, and we're wrapped up in health research. We wriggled a lot when this came out, but we couldn't get away from it. We're part of this. And the other thing is that the regulations apply to projects in train. So when it came out and we started looking at it, we couldn't find any references to lack of capacity or, you know, what the impact was for us. It said that explicit consent was the default position. It was an absolute requirement if you were conducting health research. And if you didn't have explicit consent, you had to make an application to a consent declaration committee. And it made it clear that it was envisioned that it would only be in exceptional circumstances that would happen. It also, which I should have put on the slide, a criteria for application is that you have to establish that the research is of significant public interest. So for us, when we started to review the impact, we had to stop our field work. We looked at amending our project information. We had to include all kinds of stuff like naming our data protection officer, naming the data controller, including information that was essentially making our material less accessible, but we were trying to comply with the data protection legislation. We got legal advice, and eventually we just had to accept that we were going to have to apply to the Health Declaration Committee. We got a conditional declaration, and we've started back on our field work, but we've lost months in that time. So what does it mean for everybody else? It was already difficult to secure ethical approval for research with people with intellectual disability who are immediately flagged as being vulnerable by ethical research ethics approval processes. And researchers are going to have to factor in whether or not they have the resources to go down this road, whether or not they're going to actually include people who lack the capacity to give informed consent, is that going to mean that they're going to have to apply to the Health Research Consent Declaration Committee, and all that means in terms of time and resources? We did decide that when the Health Research Consent Declaration Committee was established, that we would seek representation on the committee, and our Head of Policy, Dr. Aidan Hartney, is a member of that committee now, so at least there is a voice at the table. Into the future, it's still uncertain how the committee and how the regulations, which were issued by the Department of Health, how that's going to align with the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act, which doesn't reference research, and it seems likely at this stage that proxy consenters will not be, staff members will not be included. So the last point is, just in conclusion, people with severe and profound intellectual disability are largely invisible and they're largely voiceless. So I think that some of the measures that are designed to protect people, so within the data protection legislation, they can have perverse and unintended consequences, and these need to be highlighted. And I think that there needs to be more of a conversation about the impacts of the changes that have been introduced recently. So thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Next, we have Cliona de Vallis.
Thanks, Jenny. So today I'm going to tell you a bit about my PhD research project and how I plan to involve young people with disabilities in conducting it. So I'll start with giving you an overview of what my project actually is, or what I hope it'll be, at the very least, before telling you about what participation means and how that works within the CRPD. My plans for incorporating that within my PhD project. I'm at a very early stage, but I do have great ideas, I hope. How they'll figure out, we'll see. And some of the benefits and challenges that I've even come across even so far. So my PhD research looks at decision-making for young people with disabilities and Article 12 of the CRPD. It's primarily looking at young people in Ireland, aged between 15 and 20. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Article 12 of the CRPD talks about people with disabilities having the same right to make decisions which has legal consequences as others. And it also looks at that people may want support to make those decisions. So a decision which has a legal consequence could be signing a contract, it could be giving consent for something. There can be wide-ranging in effect, and often maybe we don't think that a decision we're making has a legal consequence all the time. They're just kind of the run-of-the-mill stuff that we end up doing. But it impacts all of those stages. Some people may want support to make these decisions, and that support, and when people are making decisions, Article 12 says it's very important that it focuses on a person's will and preferences, their likes, their dislikes, their overall view for life, in contrast to what's happening at the moment and previously, which is very much somebody else maybe making a decision for somebody in their best interest. So we think this is the best idea for you. You may not like it, but it's probably best, so we're going to go ahead with it. It's very important to note that even though a lot of these legal consequences, most contracts and things that we might think of happen when you're over 18, children have the right to express their will and preferences on an equal basis with others. And I think we develop a lot of these things at a young age. We have to figure ourselves out and find time. I mean, it continuously happens, but it often happens at young ages where you figure these things out, try stuff, fail, go again. So it's important to have, I feel, this research to figure out how young people in Ireland or negotiating those paths, learning about things, are they using support? Participation in the CRPD then. So I worked as a research assistant on the Voices project that Eleanor mentioned earlier. And when I was designing this PhD, to be honest, it was just second nature. Of course you would have people involved. Like, why wouldn't you? But it spans back to the drafting of the CRPD. If we're taking a rights-based methodology to this research, it goes back to the very drafting of it, and that nothing about us without us mantra that you saw in the title of my presentation. It goes back to people coming around a table and arguing, well, we know best, we know what works for us, and working together to achieve that. Not without a good few conflicts, as trawling through the negotiation archives has shown me, but they did still come together and say, well, even if we don't all agree on everything, we agree on these things, and this is what's most important. Children were brought into some of these sessions, but on a very limited basis, and they were brought in to present their view for one of the later ones. So a few children from different organisations were brought forward, and they gave their views on how they felt their rights were being impinged and how their rights were important. But mostly they were represented through organisations. That mantra of nothing about us without us then, the CRPD has that as at its very core, and it wants it to bring it forward when we're drafting new legislation, when we're looking at how we're going to make things accessible, when we're doing any of this type of work. I think it's really important to have that at the heart of it. And they've even published a general comment on it. So the first general comment that the CRPD committee published was on Article 12. It's since published a range of ones, including one on participation. And what it does is it highlights key issues and it explains them in more detail. This is the committee's position. So what might be in an article in the convention, a couple of lines that says people with disabilities have the right to participate, have the right to make decisions on an equal basis with others. A general comment is where they flesh this out in more detail and say, but this is how and why, and this is our position. And general comment number 7 specifically highlights that children with disabilities are themselves best placed to express their own requirements and experiences, and they're necessary in developing appropriate legislations and conventions. And if we're doing research, I think it's important that we carry this on, that we get those people involved and that we work through that. And it's, of course, as well, a very emerging methodology, whether it's disability human rights research or children's research or other things. It's something that's hopefully going to take over a lot more, but you can see a lot more of it across different projects. So how am I going to do it? I've been asking myself this for a while. So what you'll see on the screen or the presentation behind me is some of the graphics that I used to explain how I would hope my advisory group would work at a recent training I have. So you can see there my plans for participation, everything from choosing a research topic, a literature review, and data collection. And those are kind of the stages that I'm at. I've chosen my research topic because the nature of the funding streams and the sources in applying for a PhD meant that basically I didn't have the luxury of spending ages kind of working with people to come up with this idea. But if I was doing it again, I think I'd do it a bit differently and maybe approach different organisations. There's already some learning in that, I think. And then I've conducted some literature review, and I'm still doing some of that, and I'm moving on to the more data collection phase now soon. And I've recruited a few people to be on an advisory committee, and that's the first method of participation. I'm calling it an advisory committee, but they might even move into the co-research or kind of analysing research with me stage. And I've recruited 3 young people aged between 17 and 19 or around that with disabilities, and they've a range of just cross-disability or impairment on that committee, all based in Ireland, in the west of Ireland, to give me their views on, okay, this would be a good data collection method, this wouldn't be, we think this is the way you should go with this, or we want to be very involved in the data analysis phase. And that's what I'm hoping was coming up next, that when we gather the data, and once they give me their views on that, and we work together to design, whether they be interview questions or focus groups, protocols or surveys, whatever we end up deciding together, that we go on and we analyse those results together. Now, as you'll see from the 3 floaty heads alongside my picture on the graphic behind me, there will be elements of it that I think, because of the nature of a PhD, will have to be on me. So I will have to write up the findings myself. The overall final report in terms of that final PhD document is on my head, right? That's my job. They're loving the idea that they don't have to get involved in that level of homework. But the other elements of it in terms of disseminating the results and making it accessible for other young people with disabilities or service providers or people who might be supporting, those are areas that I feel and the committee have agreed that they're interested in being involved in when we get there. So some of the benefits that I've seen, and I'm not really going to spend too long on this because I think we've talked about it an awful lot today. I think we've discussed it a lot, and we've gone through the different pros of doing it. And as I said, it was very second nature. Like, yes, why wouldn't they be involved? I didn't have to be convinced of this. Was my age. So my sister is around the same age as some of the people that I've been recruiting, only a few years older, and she already thinks I'm ancient. So it's like, okay, I need somebody from this cohort to learn about their perspectives and their ideas. But also the different levels of lived experience, and Robbie alluded to this morning. Everybody, even within disability, it's not one homogenous group. We all have our own lived experience and stuff. So I bring my lived experience as a person with a physical disability to the table, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I understand intellectual disability, that I understand autism, that I understand experience of the mental health services, any of these things that you're working with. And I was really wanting to get all of those different perspectives around the table, and I got a good mix that I hope will give me and share their opinions. But also research experience, and I don't know if this is a challenge or a benefit, to be honest, but it's definitely made me think differently. So the group that I've already collected have varying levels of research experience. Some who've done research before, participated in these types of groups, conducted their own research and done lots of training, and others who were completely new to this, who don't know anything about the CRPD or the models or anything. And that was fine, that was part of my criteria, just that you were interested in disability and human rights generally and that you wanted to be here. That was my main criteria. But that's made me question how I'm explaining things. It's made me question how I'm, if I'm giving them a crash course in the CRPD so they know what I'm talking about in Article 12, well, why am I saying it that way and why are we interpreting it that way? And I think that's already benefiting the project because it's making me question things and going, but why? And how can I make this more accessible? And finally, the challenges. You'll see I have to date in brackets on the slide. I feel that there's more coming, but at the moment, I've gone through the ethical approval phase. I went through the ethical approval phase for a broad idea of what I might do for data collection, and also before I started recruiting my advisory committee. And that structure is very, very much geared, I felt, towards research participants. So asking why people wouldn't be anonymous, asking what the risks, why are you working with this age cohort, why are you working with these groups, and very focused on kind of this inherent vulnerability that it seems to be in people with disabilities. And trying to convince, and again, I suppose I was Eleanor is actually supervising this project, and I was very lucky to have had her experience going, no, this is how we justify why we're working with this, and we've done this before, and it is doable, and being able to draw on that to say, no, I am going to work with people who are under 18 who have additional support needs, but this is how and this is why, and I will make sure that I'm getting appropriate consent, and this is how I'm doing it. It was also very important for me that the advisory group would be named, and trying to justify that as well, because they were possibly under 18, because I felt like if you're giving your time and your energy and your expertise to this project, if I present with you, if I work with you, if we do stuff together, I want to be able to credit your work. I want to be able to say that they did this and this is your time and energy. And not just their parents' consent. It was also important for me that they also consented to this project. That they, if they didn't consent, then they weren't in it, but their parents did, and they said this would be good for you. Then, well, in line with Article 12 and the idea that we're not doing stuff in people's best interests and what others think are best for them, that we are working on stuff, and that they wanted to be involved. And finally, the recruitment. I think I was probably also guilty of going to some of the usual suspects when I started this process, of drawing on some CDLP and Voices contacts and going back to the same organisations to go, do you have people within these age groups? And what I found with a lot of the organisations that I went to, that they didn't. They had lots of self-advocates and activists, and other organisations had people who were older, even as adults, even if we look at the 18 to 20 bracket, they were even older than that. So how do you get these people and where do you go? So then what I struggled with was when I went to the more, what we'll consider mainstream, if that, other organisations, how you then go, they say, well, we don't have anyone with a disability. And then I give them a very broad definition of disability that goes, well, I don't necessarily just mean physical disability. I mean people with visual impairments, people who are deaf, people who, and give them a very, oh, right, okay, yeah. we have them. And then they go in as other groups. So that there is this moment of having to say that you're really going across disability approach and trying to find these people within that. So I was aiming for maybe 5 or 6 people just because I knew people would drop out and maybe not be able to attend meetings. And I ended up with 3, but they're 3 very committed, very enthusiastic young people. So I'm delighted that I have them on board. It also meant having to go through lots of parents and gatekeepers, again, challenging that idea of either parents or people coming forward and going, I really want this person on your committee. And I'm like, but does the person want to be on the committee? And trying to go back to that approach. And by contrast, people giving the idea, are you sure now you want them if they put their name forward? Are you sure now they'd be able for it? Are you sure that that would be something that they would be good at? And I'm like, well, they have, they have the lived experience, they have their own knowledge, and then we'll work from that within our grouping. So those are the main things that I wanted to highlight in this section, and I'm sure there might be some other challenges ahead of me, but I'm very looking forward to working through those challenges, even the accessibility, say, of the data collection elements with the advisory group and working together with them to conduct this research. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you. Thank you. Now we have the Irish Research Network, or the Inclusive Research Network, sorry. Is that gone? Cormac, the screen is gone from here. Where's that gone? The screen. Oh, wait. Well done. Yeah, got it. Got it. Sorry now.
Okay, welcome to the Doctors and Us, a community-based project by the Inclusive Research Network. This is our latest, this is our latest project by the Inclusive Research Network, and I'd like to introduce Joan Bodie and Nancy Ledden, my 2 colleagues here in this endeavour. So I'll hand over to Joan now for the...
outline IRN, who we are, Doctors and Us Project, key findings, what we have to say.
IRN, who we are. The Inclusive Research Network, a group of people with learning disabilities and supporters from service and university who come together to talk about research. Our partners include University of Limerick, Trinity College Dublin, and the National Federation of Service Providers.
Reasons for doing the project. People with learning disabilities suffer health inequalities and have poorer health than most others. They face many barriers to healthcare access, including physical, societal and language issues. A big Irish study about ageing, IDS Tilda, found that 1 in 3 adults with a learning disability have trouble making themselves understood when speaking with health professionals. Reasons for doing Doctors and Us project. There is a small amount of research about what it is like for people with learning disabilities to visit the doctor. Most studies are about what doctors, family or support staff have to say. Only 2 of these were projects led by self-advocates.
Our research questions. what is it like to people with independence to go to the doctor in Ireland?
Hearing stories in the focus groups. We agreed that the focus group were the best way to meet the project aims. We agreed on the questions to ask. We used many pictures to get people talking.
Workshops to lead focus groups. University supporters designed and led 4 workshops to support IRN members to co-lead a focus group. There were 15 to 25 IRN members and supporters at each one. Role play gave people a chance to practice or learn to lead focus groups.
Co-leading focus groups.
17 IRN members and 9 supporters who had focus groups.
Who took part? 11 focus group held in 2017 and 19 with a total of 66 people with learning disabilities. 36 men, 30 women took part. Their average age was 46. 11 supporters took part.
How we worked on the story so far. Co-leaders wrote up focus group notes. 2 team members read notes, then met up by Skype to colour code the notes. Working group met by Skype to group the colour coded notes ideas together. Working group agreed on which quotes showed key ideas best.
Our 3 key points. 1, feeling lucky after taking charge of my health, making doctors' visits better.
Feeling looked after. Easy access. Having a bathroom that easy access with the wheelchair. Feeling welcome. Girls at reception give a person a big welcome and a big goodbye on the way out. Feeling at ease. The doctor was lovely. He didn't speak to the staff, he spoke to me.
Taking charge of my health, booking appointments. You're independent and you want to look after the doctor's appointment yourself. Speaking up, always update the doctor yourself about what is happening for you. Managing my health details. I take my own file in.
Talking choice. What helps? Talking easy.
I know the doctor is very well, so I just go in and talk to him.
sport.
I prefer to go in on my own, but I sometimes need support when I need it.
Knowing your rights.
You have the right to say in the doctor's office when he or she explains bad news to your staff or family.
Okay. Taking charge, what gets in the way? Feeling unsure, feeling afraid to talk up, might forget what was said, not knowing the doctor, not sure why you are seeing the doctor. I am just afraid I'd forget what they say or not understand. No choice, not choosing our doctor. I am not allowed to call doctor, only staff can. Disrespect, not respecting privacy, doctor not talking to person. One woman said, I had to go to the doctor recently. I only had my trousers and bra on and doctor only pulled the curtain a bit. I felt uncomfortable for me.
Point 3, making visits better. Before visit.
Making appointments, less waiting time, better waiting room.
Be honest for yourself, speak up and say if you can't make the appointment when you have something else on.
June visit.
Easy read notes take away with you.
If I can't read the doctor's writing, you can ask him to write it clearly.
Closing comments. Closing comments. People with learning disabilities want to be able to talk easily to their doctors. People want to have easy read handouts about their health to take away after a doctor's visit. We have the right to know what is happening to our bodies and feel looked after.
And just to wrap up, if you want any additional information, you can contact me. I'm the IRN Secretary or Dr. Nancy Salmon or on our webpage. Thank you very much for hearing us today.
Thank you very much, the Inclusive Research Network. So now we have Inclusion Ireland. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Before my colleagues carry on with the presentation, I just wanted to say a few words about the stories that we collected. So as the title of our research suggests, we collected 19 stories of social inclusion. Now, those stories, some of them are told in video format and some in kind of narrative and pictures. But I suppose we had intended to show you a couple of videos this morning, but as we all witnessed, we had some technical problems and we nearly broke the system. So unfortunately, we won't be able to show you the videos. But I'd urge everybody to go to the Inclusion Ireland website and have a look at those stories, because I suppose the videos for us, it wasn't kind of an afterthought or that. It was very much, it was an aim. One of the aims of our project was to share the findings of this research in a way that's accessible to people with disabilities. So a couple of people, Robbie and Peter Kearns, mentioned this morning about emancipatory research. So we want this research to be a tool for change. We wanted the participants who took part in the research to actually be able to access the findings of the research they took part in We wanted other people with intellectual disabilities to take it up and say, look, this is a tool that we can use, and this is a tool that we can share. So once again, I'd ask people to have a look. Apologies, we don't have videos for you today, but please do go to the Inclusion Ireland website and have a look at those stories. And now I'll hand over to my colleagues.
People with disabilities don't always feel included in society and in the community in Ireland. We know that people with disabilities are more likely to experience poverty. They are less likely to have a job. They are less likely to live in a home that they choose, with people they choose, such as their friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, or wives. We choose to tell 19 stories because Article 19 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities talks about the right to live independently and be included in the community.
Social inclusion. So what do we mean by social inclusion? It's about a sense of belonging and connection to your community. It's about contributing to your community. It's about the choice to live your own life. It's about the person themselves directing their own life and making choices about their own life. It's about taking part, not just being present. Our advisory group helped us to decide what social inclusion is. Our advisory group was a diverse group with a wide range of different experiences and knowledge in the area of disability.
So what did we do? We recruited 19 people with a wide range of life experiences. We carried out face-to-face interviews with 19 participants. Some had supporters present at their request. The interviews were recorded and transcribed. We analysed all the interviews. We looked up what was the same and what was different in people's stories.
Nothing about us without us. So how did we make this research inclusive? The research team was made up of a range of people with different experiences of disability, of research, and of influencing policy. We worked together as a diverse team on all the different parts of the research design, the interviews, and the analysis. We interviewed people with disabilities themselves, not their supporters, because we wanted to hear the stories from the people themselves. We made the decision to share the findings in an accessible way through videos, written stories, pictures, and an easy-to-read report. These are all available on the Inclusion Ireland website. Making information available to people with disabilities in an accessible way is a key principle of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
About the participants, a diverse group of participants, 10 men and 9 women aged between 19 and 62 years. Participants were from farms, villages, towns, cities in Ireland. Participants had a wide range of life experience, interests and ambitions, just as in the wider population. All participants had an intellectual disability. 17 had an additional disability. Participants had a wide range of support needs.
Some more information about the participants. 12 participants were in mainstream work. 10 participants were living in independent settings. 8 were taking part in education in mainstream settings. 3 of these were in mainstream accredited education and 5 in courses for people with disabilities. 9 participants were taking part in mainstream community activities such as knitting groups, choirs and bands, or tidy towns groups. Most participants maintained self-directed relationships and friendships.
We will present what we learned under 3 headings: the value of social inclusion, what made social inclusion happen, and what good support looks like. Roy told us people would see you. I am a person that is not hidden away, contributing to society. This shows the sense of belonging and contributing that people feel. Tom told us When I'm working, I go for lunch in Doyle's 2 days a week. I've made good friends there. This shows that when people are included in one way, for example, through work, this leads to social inclusion in other ways, such as making new friendships. It has a ripple effect. Alan, who is in full-time education, told us every disability will be following me to that route because I am like a pioneer. Participants felt that by being included, they were making it easier for other people to be included.
What made social inclusion happen? Mary told us, really use their interests to make their life better. This shows the importance of focusing on the individual as a person and not on their disability. Karen lobbied everyone she met, including HICWA, and wrote to everyone telling them that she wanted a home. This shows that people's own determination and self-advocacy skills made social inclusion happen. Christine told us, I love living here because I am near all the services and I can get the bus to wherever she wanted to go. Social inclusion can't happen unless mainstream places and spaces are accessible to people with disabilities. Alan told us, they can help you make your dreams come true. Good support really made social inclusion happen. Margaret will tell you more about what good support looks like.
Good support was based on respectful relationship. It was based on common sense of humanity, two-way relationships and shared interests. Good support started with identifying the person's goals, strengths and interests. Good support helped to change things in the community so that participants could take part. Good support was smart at finding opportunities for work, education and community activities. Good support advocated for the participants to be included and to get the support they needed.
What does this mean for policy and practice? Understanding social inclusion is not defined in policy in Ireland. So does policy take into account what social inclusion means for people with intellectual disabilities?
Decision-making supports participants said choice and control was important. The Assist Decision-Making Capacity Act and the Decision Support Service are very important to make this happen, but they have been very slow to be put in place.
Participation in decision-making. Leadership and self-advocacy skills are very important to achieving a socially included life. There needs to be more training on this and more opportunities for leadership and involvement in decision-making.
Personal supports or individualized supports are important to achieve socially included life, but many services are still one-size-fits-all.
Supporters need to change their thinking about people with disabilities. It's not care that people need, it's support to live their own lives.
Mainstream services need to be more accessible and inclusive of people with disabilities. They need to welcome difference. This doesn't mean just having a ramp. It means having information that everyone can understand and that people can have the same opportunities as everyone else.
Some recommendations for policy and practice. A plan to support people with relationships, self-advocacy and other types of advocacy should be included in the National Disability Inclusion Strategy. There needs to be decision-making supports and resources for a decision support service. There needs to be supports for self-advocacy and leadership. This includes putting the HSE's plan for participation in decision-making into action.
We need person-centered support. Disability services should separate the funding for each person using the service. This would help people to choose the supports that are right for them. We need accessible housing as well as support. The Department of Housing and the Department of Health should work together on this. Organisations should use the public sector duty to address barriers to accessing services.
Excellent. Thank you so much to our presenters for highlighting the challenges that they face and also the ways in which they're incorporating the nothing about us without us mantra in the research that they're doing. So because we had a late start, I'm going to quickly open the floor to questions.